Hi. What's up, Steve? I have some ideas of what I want to talk about, but if anybody has ideas or questions about a particular book of the Bible that they're interested in, I'm happy to get feedback. I'm thinking I might just start with the book of Genesis, because there's some things that are interesting to say about it. There's some interesting things to say about Genesis, and there's a lot of sort of controversy surrounding it. But if it starts to get uninteresting or dry or something like that, let me know and we can switch to something else. Did anybody have any ideas right away? Any thoughts? Was anybody really hoping for, I don't know.
Genesis is good.
Genesis is good? No objections? Okay. No objections. How dare you? I know most of you guys, right? Some of you I haven't seen in a few years. Some of you I was hoping to not see here, but you know, you're here. Steve-O. Okay, well, who has a Bible with him? If you don't, you can find one on your phone. There's apps and whatnot. If you are looking on your phone for, if you're looking at your phone for the Bible passage, that's fine. If I see you texting, I'm just going to get really insecure, and I'm going to run out of here crying.
And not come back for
It's
another
not gonna
8
happen.
years?
Yeah, and then I'll come back 8 years from now again, exactly. So anyway, turn to page 1 of the Bible, I guess. Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. I want to give you some introductory material, though, before I jump into the actual passage. Where do I want to start? Well,
ESV?
whatever translation's fine. I'm not totally attached. I'm not really attached to any particular translation. In fact, what I'm going to be using for this Bible study is this Ignatius Catholic Study Bible. This is just Genesis. It's got a bunch of notes in it. That's what I'm going to carry with me when I'm here. It's pretty good. I mean, I'm reading about 5 different sort of commentaries as I prepare for the Bible study, and I can give you the names of them later on. Each one has sort of different strengths, but this is the one I'm going to be carrying with me here. So, introductory material. Imagine, I want to kind of set up the scenario in the right way of how to read not just the Bible, but any good, interesting, deep book that's not just sort of a newspaper article. Imagine that, how many of you like to write? I wonder how many writers there are. Chaldean, there's not a lot of Chaldean writers. I wish there were more. You don't even like to, I mean, even like email, I don't know. No? There's some of you. Okay, a few of you. Okay, good. So let's say you are writing a letter or like a poem, even better. Like you're writing a poem and you put your heart and soul into, you really meant every word, you thought about every word really deeply and seriously, and you try to figure out exactly just the perfect words to say, and you gave it to somebody that you care about a lot, and they're like, okay, cool, thanks, and then they just didn't even read it, they just put it away. That sucks, right? Or they looked at it and they were just kind of glanced at it, and then they kept looking back at their phone and texting and then glancing back and okay, cool, thanks. That's nice. That sucks too, right? Or they read it and they got a couple of lines in and said, "This is confusing. It doesn't make any sense. I don't like it," and then they threw it away. You know, terrible, right? Because if you have something to say that you think is important and you want to share it with somebody that you care about, you would hope that they would put some effort into it. Well, the Bible is a piece of writing just like that, and it's a piece of writing done by God, who's the primary author, but also the human authors that are working through His Spirit, and they're putting thought into the words, and it's a book that's written in love, and it's written to you and to somebody, and God is writing it to us who He loves, and that means that we have to put some effort into actually reading and understanding it. And the reason I'm starting with this is because Genesis, just like a lot of parts of the Bible, in fact probably most of it, is hard. It's a weird book. It's hard even to sort of know what kind of book it is. I'm going to spend a few minutes today at least discussing just the genre, what kind of book even is it, especially these first few chapters. And it's going to take, it might take hours and hours and weeks, it might even take months to even understand just a couple of passages in the scripture. And what I'm telling you is that it's worth the effort. And if you're not willing to put the effort into it, you're the one that's going to miss out. Because God has better self-esteem than we do. And he's not going to get hurt when we don't read the letter he wrote to us. He's not going to miss out on anything. We're the only ones that are going to lose. So let's see what it takes to understand what's going on here. I do want to say this, though. Let me talk a little bit about the authorship here. On the one hand, we say that the Bible is authored in a very sort of ultimate way by God, in the sense that he inspired, he put it into the hearts and minds of the human authors to set down the words in this way. But let's think about the human authors for a second. So let's say that we're talking to the author of Genesis. You know, in a very old tradition, it's attributed to Moses, but that's not really a very important thing to worry about. But let's say we're talking to the author of Genesis, and well, we wouldn't be able to communicate with him because he wrote in Hebrew. He certainly didn't know English because English didn't exist yet, so we wouldn't really be able to communicate with him very well. Our spoken Chaldean probably wasn't a very common tongue at the time, if it existed at all. And so we're communicating with this guy, and we don't even have the same language. So this person who's writing has a certain language. And that language, just like every other language, has certain qualities, has certain strengths and weaknesses, just because every human thing has strengths and weaknesses. So the language that he's writing, which is Hebrew, has certain ways of expressing things that are different than the way we're expressing them. Yeah?
Can you say Moses? Or
Moses or whoever it was. Could have been a woman, I guess, but unfortunately women were not like even allowed to be educated in a lot of these ancient cultures, so probably it was a guy. So we're communicating with him, and there's just a language barrier. That's one thing. Second, there's the historical barrier, because everything that we know and care about and understand the world to be is totally different than the way that this human author understands the world to be. So that's two levels of sort of separation between us and this other author. And so for us to communicate in a real way, there has to be a kind of double translation. On the one hand, we have to translate from language to language, but also we have to translate from culture to culture. This is written something like 3,000 years ago. So over the course of 3,000 years, a lot has changed about the way human beings even sort of experience things. So that's a double translation. On top of that, he's inspired by God in his authorship. That makes it even more difficult because the things that God has to say are deep and difficult. They are deep mysteries that are beyond our comprehension. And so without even getting into the text, it's already something that we need to understand. It's going to take a lot of sort of parsing. It's going to take a lot of sort of peeling apart to understand what's going on here. Again, it's worth our time, or I'm telling you that it's worth our time because it's been worth my time. But I'm going to ask sort of your patience because I might not get past a couple of verses today. And you have to be okay with that because what's the point of sort of skimming through a letter if you're not really paying attention to it anyway? And I'd much rather spend an hour on maybe just the first verse or two and really understand what's going on or try to understand what's going on than rush through it so that we can say, oh, I finished the book of Genesis, so what? You know? So, cool? All right. Blah, blah. I have notes here, hold on. So, what kind of book is Genesis? It actually has a couple of different sort of aspects and different sections. Certainly way later, in chapters that we're probably not going to get to maybe for a year, we can say that it has to do with history, that it recounts actual literal events that truly happened in the way that they are described there. I'm not sure the first few chapters are about that. And I'm going to try to sort of defend that because it's a controversy that I don't think ever had to really be a controversy. So let me read from the Catechism of the Catholic Church. This is the Catechism, paragraph number 337. It says, God himself created the visible world in all its richness, diversity, and order. Scripture presents the work of the Creator symbolically as a succession of 6 days of divine work, concluded by the rest of the seventh day. On the subject of creation, the sacred text teaches the truths revealed by God for our salvation, permitting us to recognize the inner nature, the value, and the ordering of the whole of creation to the praise of God. So the Catechism of the Catholic Church is using the word symbolically when it discusses what's happening in the creation account. When it's describing what God is creating and how God is creating, our catechism, the official document of the teaching document of the Catholic Church, is using the word symbolically. That's why I get sort of annoyed and it gets boring to debate about, well, Genesis says that the world is this old and it came about in 6 days, and then we know through certain scientific discoveries that the world is way older than that and it came about in sort of different ways. It's not a debate about that. Those two things, you're talking over each other. You're really talking two different languages there. Genesis is not about just a sort of list of things that happened, the first few chapters at least. If that's what geology is about, or if that's what astrophysics is about, good. That's a cool, interesting science. It's something that I actually think is personally very fascinating. But that's not the topic of Genesis. The topic of Genesis, and in general of the scriptures, is what it says here in the Catechism. It teaches truths revealed by God for our salvation so that we can recognize the inner nature and the value and the ordering of the creation to the praise of God. Genesis 1 and 2, the creation account in Genesis, is about the inner nature and the value and the ordering of the world to God. It's not about a list of things that happened in a particular year. Okay. Let me read something from Origen, who was a very, very ancient Christian teacher, one of the most revered in the early church. He says this, Origen, and he's being a little bit sort of snarky. He says, "To what person of intelligence, I ask, will the account seem logically consistent that says there was a first day and a second and a third, in which also evening and morning are named, without a sun, without a moon, without stars, and even in the case of the first day, without a heaven?" Origen's very ancient Christian writer is saying, guys, the sun and this moon and the stars were created on the fourth day. What does day mean before there's a sun? What does evening and morning mean when the sun wasn't created until the fourth day? So Origen is saying, obviously, to the person of intelligence, he's being, like I said, mean here. Anybody who really thinks about it, this is obviously not a literal account of a sort of history that happened. As if on the first day when God created light, that took him 24 hours. Time itself, sort of acts differently if you're going faster and slower through space. So 24 hours according to who? It's just a sort of meaningless concept here. I'm going to quote Thomas Aquinas. I'm really going to sort of hammer this a little bit. Aquinas, in commenting on the text of Genesis, says, in discussing questions of this kind, two rules are to be observed, as Augustine teaches. So now Thomas Aquinas, Middle Ages saint, teacher of the church, is quoting a much older saint named Augustine, both extremely brilliant, respected writers in the church, quoting him saying, the first is to hold the truth of the scripture without wavering. The second is that since the scripture can be explained in many senses, one should adhere to a particular explanation only in such measure as to be ready to abandon it if it be proved with certainty to be false. So Aquinas is saying, if there's a lot of different ways to read the Bible, don't hold on to any particular one. We should not adhere, we should not cling to any particular interpretation of the Bible, because maybe it'll be shown wrong. Maybe we'll discover something that, that isn't what it meant. Maybe we'll learn something more about the author. Maybe we'll learn something more about the world. And Aquinas says, okay, let it go. If it's shown to be wrong, forget it. That's obviously not what the Bible's teaching if it's not true, because God's the author of the Bible and of nature. And he's not going to contradict himself. You guys seeing that? Now, this next thing I'm going to read from Aquinas is going to help us understand the type of writing that Genesis might be. And I think he's onto something here. He's saying it should be, so he says, since this theory can be shown false, whatever it is he was talking about. He was talking about the waters being above the heavens. We're going to talk about that. It's on the second day, the waters being separated. He says, look, you can show this false in many ways, so obviously it's not what the Bible really means if it's not true. So it should rather be considered that Moses, like I said, the author, traditional author, was speaking to ignorant people, and that out of condescension to their weakness, he put before them only such things as are apparent to sense. So Aquinas is saying that the author of Genesis, because he's talking to people that are very uneducated, he's kind of dumbing things down to get so that they can kind of understand it. And so he's speaking in these symbols, he's speaking in these sort of very simple ways. This funny thing happens on the second day, where God separates the waters, supposedly. So Aquinas is saying, look, that's sort of the way things look. If you look up, the sky is blue. This is what's going on the second day, right? If you look up on a good, nice day on a San Diego day, you look up, the sky is blue, right? You look at the ocean, again, we have access to that in San Diego, the ocean's bluish. And then, once in a while, very rare in San Diego, water comes out of the sky. Okay? And everyone here freaks out and forgets how to drive, right? And so these very sort of simple people would have understood, oh, it's blue up there and water comes from up there sometimes. That means there's another ocean up there. Okay, they're just sort of these dumb people. Like, who cares what they think about where this has nothing to do with salvation. So Moses is sort of telling the story, all right, there's an ocean up there, and then there's these floodgates. God can sort of open the doors, and the water comes down, and that's rain. Ha ha, cute. Okay, that's it. And Aquinas is saying Moses is doing that because he's speaking to these people that are very simple, and he wants to relate to them a certain message. What that message is, we're not even close to getting at yet. But the way he's speaking is not in this sort of scientific way. He's not speaking to scientists. You guys get that? Okay. What is it about then? Well, I'm going to read a great quote from one of the commentaries that I'm reading. This is a writer named Leon Cass. The book is called The Beginning of Wisdom. And it's a commentary on Genesis. And he says this. Again, after he makes the claim that this is not really the sort of historical, momentary, moment-to-moment explanation of things, he says this. That it's about paradigms. That it's about sort of models of existing. So look at what he says. He says, Adam and Eve are not just the first, but the paradigmatic man and woman. You know what a paradigm is? It's something that represents everything of that kind. So Adam and Eve are not just the first, but in a sense, they're every man and woman. Cain and Abel are paradigmatic brothers. All brothers, siblings, sort of are represented in what happens in the story of Cain and Abel. Babel, the Tower of Babel, is the quintessential city. That's the story of every city. By means of such paradigmatic stories, the beginning of Genesis shows us not so much what happened as what always happens. And by holding up a mirror in which we readers can discover in ourselves the reasons why human life is so bittersweet and why uninstructed human beings generally get it wrong, Genesis, reflectively read, also provides a powerful pedagogical beginning for the moral and spiritual education of the reader. So he's saying that Genesis is telling us the story of ourselves, not of something that happened thousands of years ago and then stopped happening. Okay. So when we get to that, it's really going to be very interesting. So Adam and Eve is about all of us when we're tempted to sin. Cain and Abel is about all of us when we have sibling rivalry and when we get jealous and envious of others, of people that we're supposed to care about. The Tower of Babel story is about all of us when we get into our heads that we can do things on our own. That the human community alone can do everything it wants and can sort of save itself and get to heaven by itself. That's the story of all of us all the time. Does that make sense? And I think that's a much more interesting way to read Genesis than, all right, there was the stuff that happened a long time ago, and then, okay, so what? I mean, history is interesting, but that's it. It's instructive only insofar as it's about us, and we can learn about ourselves in it. Cool? All right. Well, I think that also applies to Genesis 1. I think that the creation of the world is not something that happened and then ended. You know what would have happened if God stopped creating the world? You know what would happen if God stopped creating the world? It would stop existing. It's not that God didn't create the world a long time ago and then he just chilled, as in he ceased creating, and then creation just sort of went on its own independently. No, God is creating the world right now, guys. And so when Genesis is giving us this ordering and these days and these, well, what do the days mean? We have to understand what the days really mean. We have to understand what the structure is going on because it's happening right now. It is currently happening. You with me? Okay. Finally, after all that, maybe we're ready to actually read the Bible. Let's see. Yeah, I guess that's fine. In the beginning. Okay, let's stop there. Is that a marker?
Right behind you.
I have a bunch of mirrors. What is going on in this room? Anybody want a circle mirror? Easy. All right, here's the first word of the Bible. Okay, so this is in, this is b. Freaking marker.
You want me to try that?
No, it's fine. Okay. This is Bereshith, in the beginning. So in, and then resh we know means head, so head. And then eth is either an adjective or an adverb ending. Okay. So in headly. First of all, head doesn't really have much to do with time. It can be used as a beginning of time, but it's in the principle itself. In some way, oh nice. This is a Sharpie. Hold on to die. That would have been so bad. I'm just gonna use a Sharpie. So, ooh. Yeah. Okay. You're right. This is very satisfying, sorry. Okay. So even the word reshith, in fact, some of these early Christian interpreters said this has nothing to do with time at all. Augustine thought that the 6 days had no time sequence whatsoever. God created the world all at once for St. Augustine. And those 6 days, which we're going to get into in a second, have to do with levels of goodness, of things getting better and better. And our way to understand that within nature, built into nature right now at all time, there are things that encompass the goodness of everything else. That there's things that are better and worse in nature, and that dead things are not as good as living things. You know, for example. Okay. So, in any case, this resh idea, some of the early interpreters of the church said this is Christ, the principle, the logos. In Christ, God created the heavens and the earth. Oh, thanks, I have another one. Okay. Now I have multicolored ones. Okay. But let's put that one aside. I think it's kind of a weird interpretation. I do want to say something about this letter. So we're actually not even at the first word yet. My goal is to annoy so many of you that you don't come back next week. Although it's going to be like the gym on January 1st, right? I'm only going to see half of you next week anyway. Right? It'll just be me and Wes next week, actually. Okay, so this first letter, so Hebrew, just like Chaldean, is read right to left. So this is the first letter. And this is neat. This is interesting as the first letter because these ancient Jewish commentators would meditate on this first word, and they were very detailed. They were much more pedantic and like sort of annoying than I am in the way that they read things and how much detail I read things in. So they say, okay, why is this first letter of the Bible this? Because this is actually the second letter of the alphabet. Just like in English, B is the second letter of the Hebrew alphabet. First letter is Aleph, or A. So why is it the second letter of the alphabet, and why is it shaped like this? And so they said something pretty neat. This is in the Babylonian Talmud. They said, look, God is telling us that our knowledge begins here and goes. And they said, what is above this, what is before this, what is beneath this, is not for us to know. That our knowledge, even when it's revealed by God, is limited on three sides. And even what he's revealing is only from this point on. And it's the second letter, it's not the first. Okay? I like that, it's kind of humbling. That even when God is revealing to us, he's still got something in his back pocket. There's still more for him to say. Part of that, I think, is the New Testament. Okay? But we'll get to that in 50 years. Okay, but we're making progress. The heavens and the earth. That's kind of the title. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void. Okay. Form and filling. So at the beginning, the earth didn't have this and it didn't have this. Void means empty. Okay? So it didn't have this and it didn't have this. And darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God was moving over the face of the waters. I actually have no idea what that means. Darkness was on the face of the deep, that's fine. The Spirit of God was moving over the face of the waters, I mean, what? I guess.
Could that be the Holy Spirit?
I guess. It's weird.
Father, so I know we're not trying to get ahead, but
Do
the
it, man.
Gospel of John is kind of like the genesis of the New Testament in a way, because I don't know, like John it's not more a biography. It kind of talks more about the purpose of God, and it's similar in the way of in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God.
So John starts his gospel by quoting
Yeah.
Genesis, yeah. Although so does Matthew.
Yeah.
Because the first word of Matthew is Genesis in Greek. The generation, yeah. But yeah, wait, what's your point?
But it says through him all things were made. Without him nothing was.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like almost parallel to.
Sure, yeah. We'll get to that when we get to John, but you're right. John is doing that on purpose. Yeah. Okay. I want you guys to, I'm going to announce something right now. I don't know everything. There's a lot of people that think I do, and they're the most annoying people in my life. And I keep saying, I don't. And among the things that I don't know are what you should do with your life. I don't know or care. So do not come to me. You know what you're supposed to do, just do it, okay? You don't need me for that. Yeah, Manny.
What's
up, man?
The second verse is referring to the dichotomy between God,
Yeah,
his existence itself,
okay,
and the formless, unfilled
yeah,
waters, which is nothing.
yeah,
On one hand, you have nothing, and on the complete opposite, you have God, who is
Alright.
everything opposite to nothing.
Yeah.
So that's what the second verse is about.
I like that. Now the Spirit of God moving over the face of the waters is kind of bringing both of those together. The thing that's mysterious to me is, supposedly this is before the world started, and like, there's already water, you know? Although water can be sort of easily understood as like sort of nothingness, because water, especially if at night, you go to the ocean at night, it's kind of dramatic, right? You ever go to the ocean at night? You should, it's neat. And it's just kind of like, whoa, it's just like this big, like dark thing, but it's still moving. It's like, oh, I don't know, it's creepy. Okay. Anyway, Spirit of God moving over the waters. And God said, let there be light. And there was light. All right, now something happens. And God saw that the light was good. And God separated the light from the darkness and called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening and there was morning one day. I'm going to put this here. Day one, light. You'll see how this is going to fit in a second. So day one, light, and he separated the light from the darkness. This is really interesting. What does it mean for for night and darkness to be separated? Because I'm saying you should be calling me out and saying, okay, Father, and you're saying that this is something that's happening all the time, that's sort of currently in process. And I'm saying yes. And you're going to say, well, how is this happening right now? Well, first of all, God is creating light. But second, the point of this is to draw our attention to distinction. That things are different, that light and darkness are two different things. And that's very important. Because if something is to be a creature, it's going to be itself and not anything else. And when we get to the human being, and we get to, in fact, you as an individual, you are yourself and nothing else. So the very, very first fundamental sort of concept of Genesis is distinction. You are you and nobody else. And and it says, and God said that it was good. So this idea that light and darkness are two different things, this separation. Okay, this is not, God's not like building a Trump wall to keep things out. This is just distinction between two different things. And this is something that is good in God's eyes, that there are many different things. And each of them is good. You guys got that? Okay. So this first one is light. And in fact, one of the things that the ancient world very commonly sort of pointed out about light is that it throws distinctions upon things. Right now, if I were to turn off the lights, I won't, because God knows what you would do if I turned the lights off. But if I were to turn off the lights, all the distinctions in this room would fall away. We can tell the difference between each other and between all the different things in this room because light's here. Without it, everything's just sort of one big blob. You guys get that? So light itself sort of represents this ability to make distinctions. Jason?
When it says that God saw the light was good, couldn't that be read as like he's trying it out and like, oh, it's good? But wouldn't God know that this would be good?
I mean, it doesn't say God learned that the light was good.
But God saw the light was good.
Sure.
Doesn't that like it just kind of reads off as if like, maybe it's good. Oh, it actually is. I see that it is good.
No, I don't think for God to see something is for God to learn something. I can know something already and then see it. You know what I mean?
But could you claim to be good? If you,
Yeah, sure. Yeah. You can observe something and a certain aspect of something, even though you know it.
wouldn't that imply that you learned something?
You can observe without learning. I mean, I've known you for how many years, to both of our detriment, you know? And I'm still, you know what I mean? And I'm still observing you, I'm not learning much. That was meaner than it, sorry, I didn't even mean to say that in a way. It was very funny, but it was meaner than it meant. But, does that make sense? I get what you're saying though, but it's not, it doesn't sort of fit, because even in their text, God made it, so it's not gonna be like, you're gonna make something and you're like, oh, you know what I mean? Anyway, whatever. Okay, yeah.
Does earth really mean earth? Like, do they really mean earth, or in the Hebrew Bible, does it have?
Yeah.
Is it the literal translation as earth when they say God created?
Let's get there. Yeah, that's a day from now. We're almost there.
Sorry.
But that's a good question. Yeah. Then God said, "Well, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters. Let it separate the waters from the waters." And God made the firmament and separated the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. And it was so. And God called the firmament heaven. And there was evening and there was morning a second day. So here we're talking about the waters. I'll just put it. By the way, we skipped something interesting. There was evening and there was morning one day. There was evening and there was morning. So, when does the day start for us right now? When does a new day start?
Sunrises.
When does it start?
Sunrises.
Yeah, when the sun comes up maybe. Not for me, I'm gonna sleep for another couple hours after that, but if I have my way. But if you like live a weird, unnatural life, you get up when the sun is rising, that's fine. What about, I mean, don't you guys all have that annoying friend, or maybe you are that annoying friend, that like, you're out and it's like 11:59, you're going to the bathroom and you're like, oh, I'll see you tomorrow. Right? Those of you who are laughing really hard are that annoying friend, right? Okay. So sometimes we think of the day starting at midnight, right? Sometimes we think of the day as starting in the morning when we get up, right? But this is a different way to think of the start of a day. It was evening and then it was morning, one day. So here the day is not starting when the sun comes up. The day starts when the sun goes down. Or the day starts, sorry, there's no sun yet. The day starts in darkness. And it ends in light, which is nice. It's a cute way to think about a day. You know, it's arbitrary. It doesn't matter when a day starts. We just pick a point in it, you know. But in this case, the Hebrew Bible and the sort of culture that it's coming from is sort of saying, and the way they felt about the beginning of a day in any case, is that it begins in darkness. That's really interesting. That the beginning of things is dark, and that they end in light. It's sort of telling us about life. Life begins in darkness. Sometimes it means in suffering. It means in mystery. And life begins, we sort of wake up one day and we have no idea what the hell's going on. Like there's these people that we call mom and dad, and like, okay, I guess you're mom and dad, and, you know. And it begins in this sort of darkness and mystery and nothing making sense, and then eventually it moves towards, like, we learn sort of eventually, and it ends in light. I like that. I think it's a nice way to think about it. By the way, it's not gone. There are still places where we think about days beginning in the evening, right? Christmas Eve, right? Christmas begins when the sun goes down, or at like 2 p.m. Mass or whatever, you know. Like we have the Saturday Vigil, the Sunday Vigil, which happens on Saturday. You go to the Saturday evening Mass and it counts as a Sunday Mass. It's not because a bishop decided to do that, it's because in the ancient world, the day began in the evening. This is not something that somebody pulled out of their pocket because it was convenient because St. Peter's was crowded on Sundays. You know, it was because this is a true biblical way of thinking about a day. In fact, every day we pray in the Chaldean church, we pray evening prayer of the following day. We pray Ramsha, like right now we just prayed Ramsha in the church for Wednesday. Because Wednesday started, liturgically speaking, when the sun went down. And then Thursday is going to start tomorrow evening. I'm going to pray Thursday evening prayer. Does that make sense? So this is a very ancient way to think about the world. I like it personally. But in our culture, we have at least two other ways of thinking about what a day is. So whatever, we're stuck with it. Weekends certainly start on Friday when you leave work. Right? That's pretty universal. Okay. Let there be a firmament in the midst of the water. So this is a funny image that's happening there. It's saying that God created this kind of dome. Firmament just means like some stiff thing. So like some kind of glass dome that you can see through. Between water and water. So he's separating water. But the idea is not really so much water, it's heaven and earth. So here we have sort of, you can imagine sort of as the globe, or the earth as in the planet. I don't think they have the concept of planets, but the sense of where we're at down here and the stuff up there, that's another distinction. What does that mean? It really means that there's something special about where we're at. So just like light and darkness were separated and both were good, up and down really were separated and both were good. Now you have directionality. You have the waters above and the waters below. Okay, interesting. And again, this is still happening now. God is creating light and distinction, and there's above and below in the sense that there's the sort of human world, and then there's what we would call it space, I guess, now, and they're both good. God is creating and holding together both, and there's a distinction there. Okay. And God said, and there was evening and there was morning, a second day. And God said, let the waters under the heavens be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. So now we have, so here to answer Leith's question, this earth or land, it's specifically dry land as opposed to the ocean. So the distinction here is Eretz, which is the Hebrew word for land, versus Yama. So the dry land versus the sea or the ocean. So here the distinction is light and darkness. Here the distinction is up and down, waters above, waters below. Here the distinction is dry and wet. Okay? These very fundamental distinctions. Okay. And it was so, God called the dry land earth, see that? And the waters that were gathered together he called the seas. And God saw that it was good, so they're both good. Okay. And God saw that it was good, and God said, let the earth put forth vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees bearing fruit, in which is their seed, each according to its kind upon the earth. And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants, yielding seed according to their own kinds, and trees bearing fruit, in which is their seed, each according to its kind. And God saw that it was good, and there was evening and there was morning, a third day. Let me make 2 points about this passage. So this is where vegetation appears, right? Where plants appear. 2 things that are a part of a sort of larger debate that I, again, personally think is kind of boring about evolution. It says, each according to its kind. So that's usually interpreted as each according to its species, right? Okay. And so in the 1800s, towards the end, when Darwin was publishing and writing, people would quote this Bible passage as evidence against what Darwin was doing, to say that Darwin was doing something against the scripture. Now, what was happening? Now, I want you guys to sort of see the history of what happened in the intervening years here. This was a controversy because Darwin was English, a Protestant country, influenced by Protestant biblical exegesis, which at that point in history was taking Genesis in a literal way. I just quoted when we started Bible study, the Catechism and 2 major authors, and in fact 3 major authors of the Catholic Church, saying that that's not really the right way to read Genesis. So I don't think, and there are papal documents that say there's actually no problem with evolution. if you understand what Genesis is really trying to say. And I think that's true. And I remember being a little kid, and somebody, oh yeah, well, you know, animals kind of like they grow, and then there's this really interesting thing of natural selection and survival of the fittest, and then this is how species come about. And I remember learning about that as a little kid and being like, all right, that's cool. That's it. That was the end of it for me, and then it became a debate. Why did it become a debate? I really believe it became a debate because of Kentucky, the state of Kentucky. Because the major court cases in the early 1900s were over school curriculums, and a lot of them took place in Kentucky and Georgia, those states that were overwhelmingly what we would call today evangelical Protestants. And so it became a political issue when it really should never have been a religious issue. Okay. And it's still, till today, I really think it has nothing to do with religion, it's just politics. And really, by the way, this debate does not exist anywhere except for America, as far as I can tell. It's a very American thing. To say, I didn't come from no monkey. At least right now. Okay. All right, anyway, you guys came from a monkey. We'll talk about that later. Okay. Especially, I'm not going to name names because you all know who I'm talking about. However, this is the part I like. The earth brought forth vegetation. You know why I like that? If the earth brought forth vegetation, it means, or it could imply, I think the most natural reading of the text implies that it was Earth's job to do that. That God created the earth, and one of the functions of earth itself is to bring forth life. In other words, it wasn't this external miracle. Because one of the dumb debates that happens in evolution, sort of back and forth right now, is, well, how did life, the very, very beginning of life, originate? That had to be a miracle. And you just, dude, Genesis doesn't say that. Genesis says, let the earth bring forth life, vegetation. In fact, and then tomorrow, as in the fourth day, we're going to see the waters bringing forth, the fifth day. The fifth day, we're going to see the waters bringing forth life. It was not this independent act of God. God created the earth, and then the earth's job was to produce life. If anything, Genesis implies that life can come from non-living things in a very natural process. You can see that? Now God is speaking it, but he's speaking all of it. It goes with creation. And this is now, again, let me go back to my initial sort of thesis statement here. This is happening now. God is creating and distinguishing light above and below, and he's distinguishing land, dry land from the ocean, and it's all good, and it's all happening right now, and it's all operating the way it's supposed to operate. And God is doing all of it right now. He is holding nature into existence. You guys see that? Now, what does that imply? Before I go any further, it means that any time you ask the question, is nature doing this or is God doing this? You're asking a very, very dumb question. Because nature cannot exist or operate without God. So it's not about either or, as if nature does something without God. Nature does everything by the power of God. Okay? Now, can God do something that's supernatural? Sure, that's what we call a miracle. I'm not sure that happens very often. You know, I believe the Qurban is a miracle, but it's not something that's visible to the eyes. You know what I mean? So, and what's the point of sort of saying, oh, the beginning of life had to be a miracle? Who cares? It goes back to God anyway. It all does. You guys following me then? Okay. By the way, do we have any reference to time yet? Other than this word day, which can mean all kinds of different things. In fact, the way it's defined here is evening and darkness and then light. But we don't have any reference to an hour or a year or anything like that. And again, a lot of the early church commentators saw this as, this has nothing to do with time. This is all just distinctions within nature. Okay? That's all this means. If this took one instant, the way St. Augustine believed, and Augustine said, each of these 6 days just represents a level of things getting better and better in creation. And he's saying that, you know, things when they get more specific, there's an improvement on them. And everything was created as it is now in one instant. Or other writers said, well, maybe the days could have represented, each one could have represented tons and tons of time. There's early writers that say that, early church writers that say, well, I don't know, maybe day represents like 1,000,000 years or something. Okay, so what? And by the way, I don't even think it's a good idea to say like, oh, then maybe light means like the energy after the Big Bang, and we can interpret that as being, 10 billion years, and then the waters can represent. Don't try to cram this into that. No, why do that? They're telling two different stories. You know what I mean?
But isn't that just proven because God is outside of time?
Well, yeah, even when you understand God sort of later in theology, God is sort of eternal anyway. So yeah, why would he sort of, yeah, well, I guess I better get today's work. Gets out of bed, better make a firmament. And God said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heavens to separate the day from the night. So we have light and darkness before we have day and night. Okay, interesting. Let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years. Now we finally have time, really. First real reference to the sort of passage of time. And let them be lights in the firmament of the heavens to give light upon the earth. And it was so, and God made the two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also, and God set them up in the firmament of the heavens to give light upon the earth, to rule over the day and over the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good, and there was evening and there was morning, a fourth day. So now we have the sun and the moon and the stars. Okay? So here we have fourth day. Fourth day, sun, etc. Interesting here, what's happening is now he's giving these guys the job that he did on the first day. You guys notice that? He set them in the firmament to rule over the day and over the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. So now it's the sun and the moon and the stars, their job to separate light from darkness, which was his job on the first day. Interesting, right? So they're ruling over something that he did. So he does something originally, and then he hands it over to a preacher to take care of. Interesting? Pay attention to that. And God said, let the waters bring forth. You see, waters bring forth. Not this sort of external miracle. I'm going to create them out of nothing. No, the waters bring forth swarms of living creatures. Let the birds fly above the earth across the firmament of the heavens. So God created the great sea monsters and every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarm according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. God blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the seas, and let birds multiply on the earth. And there was evening and there was morning, a fifth day. So the fifth day, he's creating the birds and the fish, which is really cute if you think about it. Who knows why this is cute? Somebody tell me why this is cute. Somebody has to get this.
Cute?
Yeah, why is it cute specifically?
That he created the birds and the fish
Yeah.
on the same day?
Yeah.
Because birds came from fish or something?
No.
Birds and fish fly.
No, you're on the right track. You guys are sort of on the right direction. What do they have in common according to the
They're
Bible?
both kind of like they're both correlated to God. Like the fish.
No,
Holy Spirit.
the fish wasn't a symbol of anything until after Christianity.
Isn't birds the fish of the sky? Or something?
Yeah. Where'd you hear that from?
I've just heard it.
That's cool. Also, what is tuna? Is the chicken of the sea? Right? That's a slogan for one of those cans. Okay. No, look at what did he do on the second day? He separated the waters above from the waters below. And here, he's like, okay, the fish live in the waters below, and then the birds live in the waters above. That's cute. Okay? I think it's cute. I don't care if you don't think it's cute. And God said, let the earth bring forth living creatures according to their kinds, cattle and creeping things, and beasts of the earth according to their kinds. And it was so. And God made the beasts of the earth according to their kinds, and the cattle according to their kinds, and everything that creeps upon the ground according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. All this stuff is good. Even like animals and insects that you hate are good creatures of God. I'm sorry. My mom hates the fact that snakes are good creatures of God because she hates snakes. And you guys hate spiders, half of you. And they are good creatures of God. You should not hate them. You should pet them. Don't pet snakes or spiders, please. Then God said, let us make man in our image. Let me get to that in a second, actually. So this is all happening on the 6th day. 6th day, land animals. So what's happening here? Form and filling. The earth was without form and void. So he starts with making the form. He starts with the sort of container. Light, waters above and below, dry land. Then, so he takes care of the fact that the earth is without form. Then he takes care of the fact that it's void. All this is in the first verse. Takes care of there's a problem that it's a void. It's not supposed to be empty, right? Nature abhors a vacuum, right? Some ancient saying. Newton, I think, said that or something. Aristotle said, yeah, sorry. So the sun and the stars and the moon fill up the sort of domain of light. Birds and fish fill up the domain of the waters. Land animals fill up the domain of the land. It's a very structured thing. And the point of this is, this structure is all happening all the time. That nature is, at all times, being created and formed and filled by God's creative act. That it wasn't this thing that happened a long time ago and then it ends. That at this moment this is happening. Okay? And that it's all good. But I kind of want to stop there because then it gets to human beings and things get very interesting and bad. We kind of screw things up. Eventually, we still have one chapter left before things get screwed up. But I want to sort of stop there and see if you have questions about any of this. Yeah.
Okay. So is God
Yes.
speaking
No.
down through the writer and dumbing down the story of creation for
Yeah.
them to understand, or is it the writer naturally seeing God's truth in God's creation?
That's a nice question.
and coming up
That's a good
with
question.
what he said.
Who's
Because-
dumbing it down? God or Moses? Right? Is that the question?
Yeah, because
Yeah, I like that.
it makes sense. Like the firmament makes
I think
sense.
both.
There's,
I
it
think both.
rains. There's water in the sky.
I think both. I think God is dumbing it down for the author, and the author's dumbing it down even more for us. Yeah, and then I'm dumbing it down for you guys. You guys go home and tell your parents, and I don't even know what's going to happen after that. Okay. Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think both. I do think both. Yeah.
So was heaven created prior to this or during this process?
As in the spiritual world. Is
As
that
in
the
the
question?
spiritual world.
Yeah, that's a question that St. Augustine asks, and he answers by saying, yes, that all the angels and stuff were created before any of this happened. That's what Augustine says. I don't
Were
know.
or weren't?
They were. All the angels were made. God created all the angels before he created the physical world. That's Augustine's teaching. I have no idea. What the hell do I know?
Okay, follow-up
Nothing.
question, maybe you don't know either.
Yeah, probably not.
So are the angels outside of time, like God is?
The teaching of
I
Aquinas
mean,
is
heaven in general, like
yeah. The
spiritual
teaching.
world.
So no, in the sense that there's change and time kind of measures change. So can angels love and learn more about God than they did before? So there's something like time for them. It's not time strictly speaking. It has. Let me give you a stupid word. I hate this word. Well, I guess it's fine. Of eternity. This is the word that medieval writers, AVE, eternity. It's called of eternity. It's like not quite time, not quite eternity, so they just stuck this word to it. They just took the word and stapled it to what you're asking about. That's all I got.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool, thanks.
But like I said, what do I know?
Is there time in purgatory?
Yeah, I think there has to be. Anytime there's change, where something's different than it was before, there's got to be something like time. Time is nothing other than a measure of change. Yeah. A counting of change.
Any accomplishments?
Oh, okay, yeah, I'll talk about that. That's good. You saved me on that one. In my spare time, I've been teaching, and I teach at a small school in Escondido, John Paul the Great Catholic University, and for 2 years of that time, I was flying up to Berkeley to get a doctorate at the Graduate Theological Union there. I finished in August, and like 5 months ago, but I just finished. That's what I've been doing. I wrote on.
Did you get the certificate?
No, they don't mail those out forever. I don't even know when the graduation is. My mom wants me to go and walk, and I don't want to do it. And I'm like, no, we're coming, and you're going to walk. And how do you say no to my mom? I don't know. If you figure it out, tell me.
started preaching.
Mhm.
And like I know in Mass last week, they talked about how Jesus first started preaching to the Jewish priests. How do they, when people first hear him say these things or these teachings, how do they know to just trust him and believe him and
Yeah.
leave their current beliefs, like Jews,
Yeah.
to then follow him?
Sure. I like that question. I mean, let me make it a more general question. How would anybody sort of go from one belief to another? And I think that's a very interesting kind of complicated question. So Jesus would fit into a pattern of, look, there's a worldview or sort of a religion where there's many gods, and then no, you sort of sit there and think about it, or somebody convinces you. No, I think really there's only one. So how are people convinced? I think part of it is through reason and like sort of argumentation. You can kind of go back and forth and maybe debate it within yourself or out verbally. In the case of Jesus, it seems to me that a lot of the people followed him because there was just kind of this intuition that like, okay, it just kind of clicked and it kind of made sense. Because the stuff that he was talking about, he wasn't really debating sort of theology with them. He was saying truths about humanity and about, I don't know, what it is to follow God and what it is to be happy and to be good, that sort of deep down you're like, oh wow, that like really makes sense. More than it was sort of this debate. There are passages where he sort of debates the Pharisees, but if you're asking about the crowds and why they followed them, it was probably because of that. It was just sort of this intuition that they just sort of felt like, okay, this clicks, I like this, it makes sense. Yeah. All right, Johnny. What's up, man?
I've held back a lot of.
I appreciate that. Thank
funny
you.
comments. Yeah, no problem. In the Last Supper, Jesus uses bread and wine, which is a Jewish custom. So where did that custom come from, biblically and
I don't know.
traditionally? Because we're receiving Jesus in the form of bread, and the significance of that in our lives.
Yeah, I don't know. I know that Melchizedek was that Abraham offered to Melchizedek bread and wine, right? Right?
That's right.
Yeah. So I mean, that's as old as it goes back. What it means to them from the text, I don't know. There are later Christian writers write about both the process of making bread and wine requires a kind of a violent act. You have to crush the wheat, right? You have to smash the grapes. So that act of violence on the one hand, and a kind of new thing coming from an old thing. So with bread, so it starts with violence and then a kind of resurrection, sort of symbolically speaking. So to make bread, you got to get wheats off of the little stalks, crush them, and then basically the most basic bread is you add water and then you bake it. So you add water and heat, and it becomes a sort of new kind of thing. With wine, you crush it, and then you sort of let it sit there, and then grape juice it ferments and becomes wine. So this idea that a violent act that is sort of is a kind of death, followed by a kind of resurrection of a new kind of thing. I think that's the thing that they have in common. Cool.
So do you compare that to his sacrifice?
Yes, that's what I'm getting at exactly. Yes.
What about when people question natural disasters? Like you're saying, God is still creating the world.
Yeah.
But when people question natural disasters and attack God or Christianity, and say, well, why would he kill innocent people?
I think it's really interesting that, like, some random thing, will happen because of wind, and then people blame the Pope. What the hell did the Pope do, dude? He's just sitting there praying for people and doing Pope stuff. So, look, here's the thing. What's all this telling us? It's telling us that God creates the world, and then the world does its job, And part of the job of the world is crap happens. And the world, here's the thing, it's good, but it's not perfect. It's not even very good yet, because human beings haven't been created. But even when human beings are created, it's very good in the sense of completion. But it's still got all kinds of, it's still got weird snake things, and it's still got all kinds of weird winds and stuff. Then winds are going to cause all kinds of stuff. And we do a lot of this crap, it's kind of like, I'm going to dump a bunch of chemicals into the pond and God, why did you do this? You did it, dude. I'm not even taking a side on any kind of debate. It's just, this is just the way of nature. And here's one thing that I want to really, really stress for you guys. Death is a part of nature. It is not a punishment. You guys need to understand that. It is it's built into the natural world. It's built into our nature as human beings. In fact, even Adam and Eve, You know, they were given a special supernatural gift to not die that they lost when they sinned. It wasn't that they were never meant to die. Anything with a body can be broken in half. You know what I mean? And that means it can cease to exist. So don't think of death as something, as an evil, bad thing that happens only because you deserve it. It is a part of nature. It's like growing hair on your head and your fingernails getting longer. It's as natural as those things. It's as natural as when you turn, I don't know, 35, you start getting hair on your back. It's the same as that. You know, sorry girls. So that's where, it's not the sort of God is smiting, you know, supernaturally punishing the world. There are occasions in the Old Testament, which we're going to read in the coming months, where that's seen as an illustration of God's wrath to wake us up. But I don't know. It just never clicked with me just on an intellectual level. Like, how much did you pay for God that he has to answer to you? Like, what did you give to him that you get to complain when he doesn't give you what you want? Even these big, huge things, like, come on, man. Like, I get it. It sucks. I'm sad as anybody else. Go and help those people then. What's shaking your fist in heaven going to do for anybody? You know what I mean? So, yeah, that's my answer. Cool. Who had her hand up? I'll do one more. Was it you? Yeah.
We got you for truth to say that you have a book out. What is that?
Biblical theism.
Oh, that one? Yeah. I should buy some copies of that. I don't even have any copies. I have a book on God's existence, kind of defending it from against the new atheist, kind of Richard Dawkins, those guys. You can find it on Amazon. Good to see you guys.